Welcome again to the Booktopia podcast. I'm Ben Hunter, Fiction Category Manager at Booktopia. And this podcast is part of a series of conversations we've been having in celebration of Crime Month, which is the very imaginatively named extravaganza of all things crime and thriller at Booktopia. It's something I'll tell you a little bit more about at the end of the chat with one of its featured authors. It's hard to imagine crime and thriller fiction today without the indelible mark of Michael Robotham. He's Australia's own multi-million copy best-selling author whose work includes the Joseph O'Loughlin thrillers, the CWA Gold Dagger winner Life or Death, as well as the TV-adapted psychological thriller The Secrets She Keeps. His latest novel, When She Was Good, is the second novel to feature the criminal psychologist Cyrus, and I love it. Michael Robotham joins me today over Skype. Michael, welcome to the Booktopia podcast.
Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure.
How are you? How have you been getting on in lockdown life?
Oh, look, I'm fine. I mean, I've been self-isolating for 27 years, so my wife keeps looking at me saying, this doesn't bother you at all, does it? You know, sure, she's sort of climbing the walls. I wake up in the morning and I come out and I make stuff up and then I go back in again and I don't see anyone, which is what I've been doing for 27 years. So it hasn't really affected me. Although now that the new book's coming out, normally I would be touring and traveling extensively, and that's when my life will change, because that's not going to happen this year.
Yeah, all sorts of changes and challenges. Let's talk about the new book. There's a kind of repetition I read in people blurbing about your books and posting reviews. And it's always some version of, wow, this guy just keeps getting better. And I read those blurbs and sometimes I would think, gosh, like Michael's written over a dozen novels. Is he really getting better? Or are we as invested fans just getting more and more excited for the upcoming novel and that emotional investment is creating a greater gratitude, greater payoff when we read them, and they are indeed all great books. But Michael, then I read my proof copy of When She Was Good, and I really do feel like you've turned it up a notch. So congratulations. It's one of the best thrillers I've ever read.
Oh, thank you, Ben. You know, it's an odd thing. I think a crime writer is only really as good as their last book. You know, there are literary writers that can write a single novel and that will define their careers, and they will forever be remembered for that particular book, even if everything they write after that is complete dross. Whereas I think crime writers, you're only ever as good as your last one. And to be honest, I think there are quite a number of writers, none of whom I'm going to name, who I think do get to the point where readers do come and say, yeah, look, I enjoyed it, but it was a bit like the last one, or readers get a sense that they're sort of posting it in. They're just sort of, they've come up with a style and they just keep repeating it. Whereas I think I don't know the reason why people think I'm writing better books. I mean, I'm trying, but I think I'm trying to write a better book each time. But I think one of the things, if there is a reason for it, that I would identify would be that I never try to write the same book twice, and it's why I've written books in different, tenses and with first-person narratives and third-person narratives and female voices and male voices and present tense and past tense, and every time I'm trying to create something different, and partly that's for me as much as the reader, because I don't want to get bored. And the moment I think that I'm writing the same book again, or the moment that I feel as though readers are saying, yeah, well, it's a bit like his last one, I want them to tap me on the shoulder and I'll say, okay, maybe it's time to pack it in, maybe it's time to retire. And but while I can keep challenging myself to write something different and do something different, I get excited when I come to my writing desk, and hopefully the readers can see that my excitement transfers into something that's exciting to read.
Yeah, that's really well put. I think in my experience, authors will come to me and say, this was the most challenging part of the book for me to write, and it will always be the part that I've enjoyed the most as a reader. The things that challenge you as an author, or the things that excite you when you're having a great time at the desk powering away, it just shines in the book every time.
And I think actually the other thing I'll say is that I think, I mean, you've got to challenge yourself, and I mean, for me, the greatest challenge of When She Was Good, because it follows on from the first book in the series, which was Good Girl, Bad Girl, was that I've never done a story that arches across two novels. And even though When She Was Good can be read as a standalone, you don't have to have read the first book. It is a story that runs across two books. And in a perfect world, I would have written both of those books in advance. But in fact, I wrote Good Girl, Bad Girl, which was published last year. And because I don't plot my books in advance, I had no idea how I was going to finish the story. And I planted clues in that first book, which I had to live with. I couldn't go back and change what was already in print, which was an enormous challenge for me as a writer, because I had to live with the clues that I'd created and solve the puzzle without knowing how it was going to end.
For listeners who haven't read either of the Cyrus Haven novels, do you want to give a brief sort of summary or pitch that doesn't spoil the twists too much?
Okay, well, I mean, in a sense, it's the same pitch for both books. I mean, there's a story about Evie Cormack, who it was a young girl who 6 years ago was found hiding in a secret room in a house where a man had been tortured and murdered. And nobody knew she was inside the walls when they discovered the body. She wasn't found until weeks later. And when they did find her, she was malnourished and showed signs of having been abused. And she refused to reveal her name or her age or how she got into that room. And so the courts gave her a new name and a new identity. They called her Evie Cormack. And both of these books start 6 years later, where she's now claiming to be 18 and wanting to be released from a children's home. And my forensic psychologist, Cyrus Haven, is sent to interview her in Good Girl, Bad Girl to decide if she's ready to be released into the world. And I guess that's Good Girl, Bad Girl. That's part of that story. And you discover a lot of things in that book about Evie Cormack, but you never discover who put her in that room and why she was there. You have to wait until When She Was Good, the new book, to learn the answers to those questions. And I guess the thrust of the story is that Cyrus believes the only way he can help this very damaged, this self-destructive, this mercurial sort of figure of Evie Cormack is if he finds out the truth about her identity. But the more and the closer he gets to uncovering who she is, there's a reason she hasn't revealed who she is. There's a reason she's been hiding. And the closer he gets to discovering who she is, the closer those people who are looking for her are getting to finding Evie.
Yes, there's a fantastic tension between Evie and Cyrus throughout the novel. Cyrus wants the truth, and thinks the truth is the sort of the value with which to strive towards to solve every issue. But Evie is working against him, and she always has a polar opposite worldview.
Well, she knows, I mean, because basically she's tried to explain to him everyone she has ever loved has died, and everyone that has ever gone searching for the truth has died. And so she realizes how vulnerable she is, but as much as she tries to tell him, you do not go looking, he thinks this is the only thing that will free her. And he triggers a tripwire. And there are powerful people who, for Evie to them is the last witness to their appalling crimes. And if they find her and destroy her, they can get away with it. And Cyrus doesn't realize this. Evie has tried to explain it, but he just doesn't realize. He stumbles from one thing to another. I mean, with the best possible intentions, he's her only friend, but doesn't realize what danger he's putting them both in.
And Evie also has this brilliant ability to know when someone is lying almost perfectly every time, which is just a fascinating trait. And that's that comes from real psychological research, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does in a sense. I mean, there are people who have a heightened ability to tell when someone is lying. And I think they're sometimes called truth wizards. And a lot of them have training. They've spent years working in careers like the prison service or child services where they're lied to every day, and they develop an ability to tell when they're being lied to. But the best of them is about 80%, have an 80% ability. Evie's ability is greater than that, and her ability comes from the fact that she has been so terribly abused that she has learned to pick up on those tiny telltale clues, because she's had to do it to survive. Whether she's going to be hit or hugged in a split second, she can tell whether someone's a danger to her or not. But it's an interesting. I mean, she's probably. Oh no, probably. I think she's the most exciting character I've ever written. And on the one hand, it's a risk to write a crime novel in which a major character can tell when someone's lying, because you're on track to write the shortest crime novel in history. But I sort of fixed that by making her such a compulsive liar and so damaged and so uncontrollable that nobody believes her when Evie does tell the truth, because she lies so often. But no, and she stems from a complete fascination I have had for probably 20 years with lying, and the psychology behind lying and why we do it.
Tell me about how you research that aspect of your fiction. I mean, you don't have a tertiary education in criminal psychology that I'm aware of. So what do you, how do you approach the research, and what do you go looking for?
Well, I guess the research into a character because the novel Good Girl, Bad Girl, and When She Was Good, and have got the dual narrators. Evie narrates one chapter and Cyrus narrates the next, and the story is told through both their eyes. From the point of view of a psychologist, I worked for many years as a journalist and then as a ghostwriter with a man called Paul Britton, who was the pioneer of offender profiling in Britain. He was a clinical psychologist, and he was the real life psychologist that Cracker was based upon, that amazing BBC series of probably 25 years ago now, starring Robbie Coltrane playing a criminal psychologist. And so Paul Britton in real life worked on amazing cases like Rachel Nickell and Fred and Rosemary West and Jamie Bolger, and I guess so my knowledge of psychology comes from my work with him and having done 2 books with Paul. When it comes to lying, I became fascinated. Actually, it stems from a book that I read many, many years ago, quite a famous book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks, who was quite a famous neurologist. And he told a story about walking through a particular hospital, and there were all these aphasia patients there. And aphasia patients are people that have they cannot put a name to things. They know what it is. It's a bit like they've suffered brain damage, so you could show them a pair of scissors, and in their head, they know it's a pair of scissors, but they can't name it. They can't tell you that it's called a pair of scissors, but they know it. But they were watching Ronald Reagan giving evidence and or making a speech on TV, these aphasia patients, and they were laughing while he was giving the speech. And when Oliver Sacks asked them, "Why are you laughing?" and they said, "Well, he's lying." Now, these patients had no idea what Ronald Reagan was talking about, but they knew he was lying because they were picking up on these incredible sort of clues, visible, tiny little tells. They're called micro expressions. And that's where my first fascination came from. And then I began to read the work of Professor Paul Ekman, who's probably the world's leading expert on lying. And he's written a lot about these micro expressions. I mean, some of them are only a 20th of a second long, but you can't hide. That's why you can't hide from them. Someone can smile on their face and appear incredibly genuine, but somewhere around the eyes there will be this absolute tiny micro expression which will reveal something very different.
That's fascinating. Tell me a bit about creating the character of Cyrus Haven. What makes him tick, and how do you relate to him as opposed to your long-standing psychologist character, Joseph O'Loughlin?
Well, I guess Joe O'Loughlin was closer in age to me, and he had daughters. I've got 3 daughters. Joe O'Loughlin had 2 daughters. I guess in many ways he was the most autobiographical character that I've written. We had very similar outlooks on life. He was far cleverer than I am. He was far braver than I am. A bit of wish fulfillment there. Cyrus is younger. He's only in his early 30s. He's got quite a tragic backstory. He survived a family massacre that saw both his parents and his twin sisters killed when he was only 13 years old. He came home from football practice and found their bodies. And everyone assumes that's the reason he became a psychologist. And maybe it is. That's partly it. Maybe it's something more. I haven't decided that yet. But he's a younger Joe O'Loughlin in a sense. He doesn't have the debilitating sort of disease of Parkinson's, but he is burdened by these ghosts that haunt him about what happened to his family. And I think one of the beautiful things about the relationship between he and Evie is that Evie has got every reason never to trust a man. Given what's been done to her in her short life, she has no reason to ever trust a man, ever. And Cyrus comes into her life, and I think the moment of truth comes when she realized that maybe this man is even more damaged than she is, and it might not just be a case that he's trying to save her. Perhaps she can save him.
It's a fantastic dynamic they have. Tell me, you've had a big successful career as an author, but you've never had to launch a book during a world pandemic with all its associated travel and social restrictions. How the heck are you going to manage that, Michael? And what have been some of the strange and unforeseen events in touring and promoting other novels you've had over the years?
Oh, I have so many stories about touring books. I mean, all writers have them. We get together and people wonder what writers talk about. And apart from talking about the craft, we normally try to one-up each other on stories about disastrous events we've had. You know, I remember chatting to Ian Rankin once and telling him that I turned up in San Diego and there were 50 chairs set out and only 3 people turned up, thinking, I mean, he was going to feel sorry for me. And he looked at me and said, 3? And I said, yeah. He said, I got 1. And so everyone sort of has stories. They're called their mortifying moments about touring. There are also some wonderful, wonderful moments. I remember turning up in Germany on a tour and having fans waiting at my hotel for me. And then I went and did an event in Cologne, and there were 700 people in the audience, and they queued for an hour and a half in the snow to get a book signed. And I got a little inkling what it was like to be a complete rock star, till I get home, of course, and my wife puts my feet back on the ground. But I mean, there are sort of, you get that mixture of sort of, particularly in the early days, you have the mortifying moments. I think one of the great benefits of being a writer now, and it can be a downside, but back in the dark ages, and I've been writing for a lot of years now, really you didn't get much feedback until you went out touring or went to a writers' festival. You didn't really get to communicate with the readers. I mean, occasionally they wrote you letters, and invariably they went via the publishers, these letters, and the publishers would have gone through them and taken out the really poisonous ones and only sent you the herograms.
Right.
Now through social media, you're getting everything. You're getting feedback through Twitter and Facebook and whatever every day, and the vast majority of that is very positive and uplifting and moving. But there's a percentage of it which is toxic, and you simply have to try to ignore that and not let it get you down.
Absolutely. I really enjoy reading some of the very strange 1-star reviews on Booktopia, particularly for novels that I love and that are widely acclaimed. You know, so many readers will just will miss it, and you feel sorry for them for not enjoying a book that you've you've loved so much, but it's often very entertaining to see
it
how
is.
they dealt
And
with
to a
it.
degree, it's funny. I mean, I know it's changed a little bit with other sort of review sites where at least now they have to be verified purchases to leave reviews. But even then, occasionally you'll come across a 1-star review, and you'll look and find it's the only review of any book that this account has ever posted. A little part of you then wonders, has someone gone to that effort of creating an account just to post a 1-star review? Or is it something, is it something more sinister than that, in terms of people trying to, I mean, I remember, a few years ago now, before you needed to have a verified purchase, I mean, my first 5 reviews on a site were 1 star, and the book didn't come out yet for another 2 weeks. And I kept thinking, how could I have 5 1-star reviews when they haven't read the book? And it was all about people being upset about the price they were going to have to pay when the book did come out. And they decided to give me 1 star based on the price, which I remember ringing up friends of mine, pleading with them, listen, when you do read the book, can you post a review? Because at the moment I'm averaging 1 star for my book. I'd like to lift it off 1 star if I could.
Oh, I'll be sure to go and put a review in. I'll be generous. There's a 6-part TV adaptation of one of your standalone novels, The Secret She Keeps. It's aired on Channel 10 and can be watched now on 10 Play in Australia. Is it the first book you've had adapted for screen? And what was the experience for that?
It's not the first book I've had adapted. In a sense, one of the first ghostwritten books I ever did was a book called Empty Cradles that got turned into a film quite a few years ago now, called Oranges and Sunshine, about the child migrants that were sent to Australia. That was a non-fiction book, and the Germans have turned 7 of the Joe O'Loughlin books into, or 6 of the Joe O'Loughlin books so far into sort of movies or telemovies.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, but I obviously couldn't have anything to do with those because they're all in German. I've only ever watched one of them. I actually sat at a world premiere in a cinema in Hamburg with the cast and directors and walked the red carpet, and I was the only person in the audience who couldn't understand a word of what was going on because there were no English subtitles provided just for me, so I just watched the whole thing in German, which is an interesting exercise.
Yeah.
But this one is interesting because The Secret She Keeps had a couple of offers, including a big very successful UK company wanted to buy the rights, and I'm really pleased I went for an Australian company, Lingo Pictures, who are wonderful. They did Lambs of God and Wake in Fright, and they've done some wonderful, wonderful dramas. And one of the reasons I chose them was because I would have the opportunity to actually be in the story room, be in the writer's room, storyboard, and obviously go on set, all of which I managed to do. And I loved the storyboarding. I loved working with the writers. I found the filming incredibly boring, only because all of the actors who could just shoot the same scene, 18 times and maintain their level of emotion and through every single take. But it did teach me why. It did actually convince me that I'm quite happy that I'm a novelist, and I came to realize that as a novelist, I am technically God, and I have control over all things. I have editors that might suggest things, but ultimately it's my decision. Whereas when you get involved in TV and film, you get network notes and distributor notes and producer notes and director's notes and actor's notes, and you have
a lot of fingers in the pie.
Oh yeah, but I think I'm saying that I did a tremendous job with the drama, which did very well, and it's just finished screening on the BBC in the UK. It's the first Australian drama to screen in prime time on BBC One in history.
Congratulations! And
it pulled in, I think it got 3.2 million people on its first night, and it was in the top 10 most trending topics on Twitter. And so it's It's done very well. I mean, I think it's very commercial. It's very fast. It's like one of those. I put it in the same sort of category as something like Big Little Lies and the drama there. That it's just it's commercial but quality, and you can't help but binge it.
Mm. I mentioned at the top of the podcast that we're celebrating Crime Month at Booktopia. And you've been kind enough to put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard and give us a list of crime books that you've particularly enjoyed or have had an impact on your writing. And you've picked some cracker books, Michael, some of which I've read and adored, and some have been on my to-read list for a long time. I'm ashamed to have never have read them. We're publishing your recommendations on the blog, and I encourage listeners to head over and have a sticky beak. Some of your picks are not primarily classified as crime fiction. Some are positioned more as literary or historical fiction. Hannah Kent, for example, has Burial Rights, which has all of the elements of a great mystery, but obviously it's not pitched that way. What is it that you like about Hannah Kent?
I find that's an interesting point you make about the way it's so much of it the way things are pitched. It's interesting. It's like I remember back when Peter Temple, the late great Peter Temple, wrote Truth and the Broken Shore, that his publishers made, Text Publishing, made a concerted effort not to put a really commercial cover on the book, but to put a literary style of cover, to pitch it as literary fiction. And Peter went on to win the Miles Franklin. And so many elements. I mean, again, this goes back to, the demarcation. Where is the demarcation line between, genre fiction and literary fiction? Because there are crime writers whose books can sit alongside the very best of literary writers, who are writing, and are writing an astonishing level. And Hannah's a classic example. I mean, Burial Rights is a wonderful mystery. It's suspenseful. It's atmospheric. I mean, it's got a tremendous sense of place. I mean, it fills you with dread. It's got all those wonderful elements that we love in crime fiction, but it's a beautiful literary novel. And I guess I aspire to write something that straddles those worlds, if you know what I mean. And I think a lot of the examples I've given, books like Smilla's Feeling for Snow, and there are others like Snow Falling on Cedars or The Constant Gardener by John le Carré. I mean, these are all beautifully crafted books, but they, you could call them crime novels, you can call them mystery novels, but they're just great novels.
What about Peter Temple? You pay tribute to his work. For readers who haven't discovered him yet, where do you recommend they start?
I think, if you want, the Jack Irish books are enormous fun, in terms of they're full of such humour. And I mean, Peter Temple has the greatest descriptive turn of phrase ever. He can sum up a character in a paragraph that just makes you smile. And he's also probably the master of capturing the Australian dialogue, a turn of phrase of what the way Australians talk to each other. He's got such a brilliant ear for dialogue. But those books are easier reads. I mean, I think personally that The Broken Shore should have won the Miles Franklin. And in truth, while I think it's a tremendous book, I feel as though it's not as good a book as The Broken Shore. They're both brilliant, don't get me wrong, but I think The Broken Shore is the best book that Peter wrote. It's sad that he's not around to write anymore, but to me, that's the best book he ever wrote.
Yeah, it's an eclectic list, but it's also a real who's who. You got Val McDermott, you got John le Carré, Gillian Flynn. I'm wondering, what did you grow up reading or even watching that got you excited about the whole genre before your writing career even began?
I'm not a crime reader, and wasn't when I was growing up. I'm an accidental crime writer. I didn't realize I was writing a crime novel when my first novel, The Suspect, triggered a bidding war at the London Book Fair in 2002. I knew there was a mystery at the centre of it, but it was more, I suppose, I was looking for something more along the lines of an Alfred Hitchcock type drama of, wrong man, wrong place, wrong time, type story. And I mean, when I was growing up, I like a lot of teenage boys, I binged on fantasy. I mean, I was a huge Tolkien fan, and I must have read Lord of the Rings about a dozen times, and still have a dog-eared copy, which is my most treasured book, because my local school librarian got so fed up with me borrowing this book, and when she forbade me borrowing it again, I took to hiding it in the library so that I could sneak in and read it at lunchtime. And when she caught me, because I didn't want anyone else to borrow it, and so when she caught me, instead of punishing me, she gave me the book. And it's held together with gaffer tape, literally with gaffer tape, this book. But it's my most precious book because it's the first book I feel as though I earned, so I mean, I grew up reading that sort of stuff, and then I discovered, I loved the Great American. I didn't like the text I was taught at school, Sons and Love, D.H. Lawrence or Austen. I love Austen a lot more now, but I love the American writers, Hemingway, Faulkner, Steinbeck. I loved because I felt as though they were there was far more action, far more stuff happened, and there was far more adventurous, really.
Thank you so much for being generous with your time today, Michael. Last thing I want to ask is, what are you working on next?
I'm putting Evie and Cyrus aside for one book. I will be going back to them and doing another book, a third book in the series. But I'm writing a standalone, which I do every so often. And this one features as a story of a young policewoman, Philomena McCarthy, or Phil, people call her, who rescues a woman from a domestic violence situation and creates an infatuation story. So it's sort of it's early days, but it's a story about toxic friendships, really, and how toxic they can be.
Sounds delicious. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Ben.
When She Was Good is published by Shet and is featured in Crime Month at Booktopia. It's one of a great collection of hand-picked favourites for which we've applied extra discount over the whole month of July. And Aussie residents who order When She Was Good or any of those featured picks by July 31 will be in the running to win the Ultimate Sleuth Pack, which is over $800 worth of new books. To shop those picks, as well as some guest curated selections from the likes of Derval McTiernan, Christian White, Chris Hammer, and Michael Robotham, go to booktopia.com.au today.
Thank you for listening to the Booktopia podcast channel. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud and iTunes for free, and get access to hundreds of author discussions, book analysis pieces, and more. Or, if your eyes need a workout, head to Booktopia TV on YouTube. Don't forget, for all books featured in this podcast, and for access to a whole bunch of other fun content on our blog, head to Booktopia, Australia's local bookstore, at booktopia.com.au.